Hey everybody, we're live. How you doing? It is 9:46 in the east, which makes it 6:46 in the west in Oakland. And back with my friend, the new lighter version of Mike Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
How are you?
Great. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Happy holidays. And it is a grand year. Hey, so we're going to talk about Howard Terminal to frame this conversation and find out where we are, because you and I have talked quite a bit off camera about where we are. We kept saying, well, gee, we don't know, and we're getting this and that. And I think something that you put out on the on the website of the East Oakland Stadium Alliance pointed to that kind of public darkness, if you will. But I interviewed Oakland District 6 council member and mayoral candidate Loren Taylor earlier this week on Monday. And, well, this is what Loren informed us about. This is what he said regarding Howard Terminal. And there's the council member, his eminence, and this is what he said. Where are we with Howard Terminal?
Howard Terminal is moving forward. I know the city's negotiation team, city administration, is meeting regularly, consistently with the A's. The fact that the A's are regularly at the table and engaged is a very positive sign. And so feel good about the progress being made there. Also, we are expecting that sometime soon, I can't put a specific date on it, we should have the final EIR published for review. Environmental impact report should be coming out. And we are still sort of on track to have the variety of, I will say, agencies that need to vote on the project, whether it's BCDC, whether it's the port, you name it, teeing up to the ultimate vote by the city council on that sometime in 2022.
Well, where are we with the infrastructure finance plan? Because nothing can happen without that by law.
Yeah, so my understanding is that the city and the county, our representatives, are working on sort of detailing that and getting that all structured in a way that allows, or at least what that would need to look like to move forward. As you know, the county and the city both did their sort of tentative sort of commitments yet to be finalized, but at least directionally that they would participate in that.
But did they? Because the infrastructure finance plan, as it's done around the state of California, you have a community component. And this is my issue with how the mayor had it done by her people, is basically you can just use SB 293 Skinner, take that money, that's excess, put it over to the community. It's allowed by law. The overlay is a Melrose district, which you really don't need if you take a look at the rules, right? So my point is, it's more than just the county being involved. It's also making sure that you have sources and uses, and you have a bond issue that can pencil, so you can say, okay, the bond issue is going to be X, and we're going to get Y proceeds. And this is the first time I can remember ever in our history we didn't have that nailed down. So have they given you a date when we're going to have that nailed down? And are you comfortable that the A's are so comfortable with in Major League Baseball that they're going to stop their work in Las Vegas?
So that's a loaded question on three different counts. First of all,
I didn't mean to be loaded.
Are the A's ever going to stop their parallel process until we get the final vote? No, I don't expect them to. They're trying to play both sides and use that as the bargaining chip. So I don't think that's a realistic expectation that them as business savvy negotiators would ever stop that process until we have the final vote. I think that's the first thing.
Why they're doing it, right?
What was that?
You understand why they're doing it, right? Because we're behind schedule. I'm saying, like all of us, we're behind schedule.
Absolutely. I mean, it's about leverage. It's about having, chips to play against the other. And so I don't disagree from a business standpoint that makes sense. I just think we should manage our expectations. I don't think they're going to close the door on that until we finally ink the deal here.
What I'm asking, Councilmember, I hate to press this. Please forgive me.
On the CFD,
okay.
You're talking about the infrastructure financing. So I do not have a date when that will be finalized, but the conversations that I have had, they have confirmed that the three parties, the city, the county, and the A's, are optimistic and feel good about the approach that we're on. And so, or at least tentatively feel good about that. No one's signed anything finally, but it seems directionally that we are there. You mentioned the CFD, and I do think that the CFD is important because the CFD is the backstop.
It's Melrose on another term. It
Yep.
just means the A's have control of the property, and that they have their own board, and they can use the money that they raise to pay for services and all that stuff. Go ahead.
Yep. And that Melrose district is the backstop for the infrastructure financing district if it doesn't raise enough money. If something's wrong in the projections, it's that CFD that's accountable. So that protects the city's reserves from getting from coming after the city, because it'll be the property owners through that Melrose district.
And that's where, I'm glad you said that, though, and that's where what gets me. If you read SB 293 Skinner, it doesn't even mention the need for Melrose to have the same advantage. That's why I'm saying, did Bob Gamble or somebody talk you guys into this, and no one checked them and said, hey, you know what, dude, you know what you're talking about? Read this stuff, because it's right there in the law. You didn't have to do it like that.
I will look into that. I'm not prepared to go into that granularity of the law, but I will look into that.
Dude, man, I will treat him like the Hulk treated Loki. Okay, I'm serious, man. I'm tired of this stuff.
I love the Marvel reference. Avengers, absolutely.
There you go. Council member, tell them why they should vote for you for mayor and how.
Okay, so there you are, Mike. There's
Yeah.
there's a Howard Terminal update.
Well,
Well,
I think really great council member because those are really need to be asked about what's moving forward. What are the expectations that people have? And I think when we're doing this right now, we're sitting in a place where people don't know what is going to be in the development agreement. We don't really know what the scope and scale of the EIR recirculation or non-recirculation is going to be. I mean, we heard from him there. I think that was pretty definitive that he's been told that there's not going to be a recirculation of any part of that draft EIR.
You have concerns about that?
Yeah, well, how they justify that is going to be really key to how they're allowed to move forward with the project. They had a lot of comments, and they ranged from the ones you would expect from us and other folks that have very specific issues with respect to things like traffic circulation and the impacts on the port and things like that, to pretty broad ranging comments from public agencies, including BCDC and State Lands Commission, two of the other bodies that need to vote on this, that are going to be responsible agencies under CEQA, which means they have to have faith that the lead agency did a good job with the EIR before they take any action under the Environmental Quality Act. And their comments were they didn't know whether or not this was a program EIR or project level EIR because of the way that it was handling issues, the way it defined the program scope, the project scope and description, really kind of baseline stuff that when you fix it, typically that would trigger a recirc. So that'll be interesting. The other thing that I think is pretty interesting is we're sitting here at December 15th. The city's policy on release of these types of documents and draft and final EIRs is released on Fridays. If they really are going to get this done before the end of the year, it's either this Friday, the 17th, or it's Christmas Eve on the 24th or New Year's Eve on the 31st. I don't see those happening. So it's like kind of like now, or you're looking at January for a release. And so then we're back to your question, which is how we put the IR aside, all the other agreements that you have to reach and all the other stuff that you have to do to actually get something in front of council with the community benefits agreement and the Seaport compatibility plan and all that stuff. How do you do a development agreement if you don't know what the financing is? Right? So if they're still talking about it, how is that going to be ready? And why? So then, why would you? If you're not going to do a recirc, if you think your final EIR is done, why would you release that before you felt confident about having a development agreement done so you could schedule a council date? That's the only reason you should release your final EIR, because you're confident about the date you're going to schedule a vote at council. And if they don't have a development agreement done, that's a problem. And so I'd go back to what Councilmember Taylor said about, saying it's a good sign the A's are at the table. Well, hell, if they're not at the table, there's no table. They're the developer. Of course they're at the table. Same thing on the county side. We know that what the county asked for was someone to basically do a gut check on the consultants' work that the city gave to them from Century Urban. And the A's agreed to pay for that third-party review. And as far as I understand, there was an update to the county board the other day, and they confirmed that they haven't actually inked that deal yet. So they haven't even gotten to the contracting phase. And it's just hard to imagine that the development agreement is going to be in front of somebody if you haven't actually addressed those baseline questions. We're going to have a lot of questions out of the final EIR that go to the issues that you've raised consistently that are just kind of fundamental to what this project looks like. What's the scope and scale of what you're going to be spending the money on? That goes right to your sources and uses comment that you've been pretty consistent about from the very beginning, right? You don't have a chicken and egg problem when everyone's cards are on the table. And we have a chicken and egg problem here because everyone's cards aren't on the table. And then once they're on the table, then you get to have a real debate about, what's the project scope going to look like in the context of the framework of the project, right? We're not there. We do know that the city is still holding on to that $352 million number. That number's 2 years old, and as far as we know, it's from the A's. It was never actually vetted by the city. Does that actually take into account any of the community benefits? Does that take into account the seaport compatibility measures? We know it doesn't. Is it going to address any of the EIR issues that need to be resolved after you've gone through that draft process? Absolutely not. And construction costs, as everyone knows, in California have not gone down in the last 2 years. They've gone up. With the amount of uncertainty we have around what not only construction, but obviously other supply chain issues that are out there, I just don't think it's reasonable for people to assume that all the baseline assumptions in the EIR are correct. So even if you did everything in the environmental process 100% correct, again, you're back at this question. How do you know what your tolerance for deltas out of your development agreement are if you haven't done the baseline calculations that you need to do the financing? I don't know. So how would a council member make a decision about whether or not this is a good investment or not? I don't know. How would they even decide whether or not they need to do what council member was talking about with respect to a backfill on the Mellow Ruse? I don't know. You raised the question of, the traditional process for all of the tax increment revenue with the bonding. And we still don't have a clear concept of whether or not they're going to be using bonding or not, or whether or not this is just
I'm actually reading SB 293 Skinner to remind myself of what it says, and
it talks about bond issuance, absolutely,
in detail.
Yeah,
and there's no reason not to follow it because it's the roadmap.
So is a tax subvention something that is really following the 293 model? Well, it's not traditional.
No, here's the thing though. Every everyone, I'm looking for the statute. I'm a little foggy today, but I'll just say, cut to the chase. Every version of SB 628 BO, which is the father of enhanced infrastructure finance development legislation, has provisions where it's the district that basically can backstop the bond issue in such a way they wind up owning the development, I believe through the mortgage, not
Sure.
the city.
Sure.
And
You
so
could be creative about private placement with that bond too. I mean, if you really wanted to go at it and say, hey, A's, put your money where your mouth is and completely indemnify us, make them the sole underwriter of the bond.
yeah, they could do that. But each one of these items of legislation doesn't put the city, if the city were to echo them, at risk. So this talk about it points consistently to my assertion that they're not competent. I hate to say that, but it underscores a point.
Yeah.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I've never seen us look this bad in terms of what we've done. I mean, to put things in their proper perspective, you may remember when we started doing swap options, and we did sale leasebacks.
Yeah.
We've been quite the innovators in a lot of financial tools, and you and I have been around to observe that and in some cases be a part of it. So for
we used to facilitate silo transactions all the time in order to, obviously monetize the tax benefits of private ownership of public equipment. That is still a completely valid strategy. The tax benefits have changed, but that doesn't mean you can't do it.
No.
And if you have the revenue stream to offset whatever tax benefits you were going to have from silo, it's still out there. I mean, I think to your point, when you do these things in order, it provides transparency and accountability, but it also provides a freedom to people to actually be creative and sit down and say, I really need to provide a pathway for a discussion. And that's what I think where we're at with the A's, is that discussion is still not on the table for us. And I think that's what's most frustrating for us, right? We know that in order to make this, well, I'll take a step back and just say the obvious again, that we all know, if you wanted a quick and fast resolution to this problem, or the problem of not having a stadium by 2024, you wouldn't have picked Howard Terminal. If you wanted a place where you didn't have massive amounts of infrastructure and mitigation for your site, you wouldn't have picked Howard Terminal. That's just basic due diligence. The league knew it. The A's knew it going into it. That's why Lou Wolf, for years, said, not going to happen, not viable. We're not going there. It's not because they didn't do due diligence on the site. It's because they did. So in order to get over all those hoops, you make the project bigger, right? You derive more revenue out of the project in order to pay for all these additional impacts. But that means you've got to pay for all the additional impacts. And what you put out there and what I am struggling with is the fact that, when they went through SB 293, you know what they put in there? They put in, we could use these revenues to pay for port infrastructure. And they specifically put it in the bill.
And get this, to add what you're saying, I found that specific area regarding a responsibility of payment. The district board, the city council, or any person, this is a subdivision 4, I got lost in it, but anyway, the district board, the city council, I'll read it and then I'll work backward to tell you where it's at. The district board, the city council, or any person executing the bonds shall not be personally liable on the bonds by reason of their issuance. The bonds and other obligations of a district issued pursuant to this chapter are not a debt of the city or of any of its political subdivisions other than the district, and none of those entities other than the district should be liable on the bonds, and the bonds or obligations should be payable exclusively from funds or properties of the district. That's the way it reads. The bonds shall contain a statement to this effect on their face.
Yeah.
The bonds do not constitute an indebtedness within the meaning of any constitutional or statutory limitation. But the city has been saved by this.
Well, but the bonds.
But get this, Mike, because I love the city's been saved by this, yet the mayor.
It's of no consequence to them if they don't use it.
Yeah, and then they're trying to jettison it. I'm like, why? And then they use Melrose, and then they have the city council under the idea that Melrose is going to save them from, being responsible.
The only way to leverage the amount of money for mitigation they need to do this project right is by using SB 293.
Yep.
By front loading the benefits of the project through underwriting and through a bond, and receiving the protections that are explicit in SB 293 with that bond. So no one at the city or the county or any other participating districts is left holding the bag. But they don't have those protections if they're using these other things. And I think, it was pretty illuminating for councilmen to say, well, we need the CFD in order to backfill the risk. Well, what's the risk to the general fund if you do it right?
Yeah. This is 23A.
But if you're the city and you take on the liability by telling people in your draft ENA that all of a sudden you're going to be responsible for all the offsite infrastructure, maybe you do have some exposure. Where's the revenue?
But here's what gets me. Here's what I want your response to. If I were you, and if I were in particular the community that spent a year involved in this planning, I would be livid if I found out that the plan that we came up with was not subject to a financial review and fit into a bond issue, and then figure out that, hey, there is money there, but they're avoiding it. They're not paying attention. And then the project manager comes up and says, well, we're not going to use SB 293 Skinner, but then it talks about the overlay district. And my first response is, where the fuck did that come from?
Hey, let me tell you exactly.
You're not going to, okay, not to you. When I say you're not going to I'm talking about in terms of them. I think they came up with this to have complete control over the money of the land. And I think the city got bamboozled, didn't know what it was doing.
Yeah, let me tell you exactly why I'm not livid. We're not at a place where I can be livid about anything yet because nothing's happened. I mean, look, in 5 days, it will have been 5 months since the July 20th council meeting where they adopted the tentative term sheet. And all the council members said they wanted to see, the full development agreement, the community benefits agreement, and seaport compatibility measures before the vote. I have not, and no one else that is working with me on the maritime side of the equation, we have not received a call from the city administrator's office, from city planning, from anybody trying to actually resolve and solve the seaport compatibility measures process. We're at the front end of that still. I mean, we just went through a process with the port over the summer, which identified issues. We haven't narrowed issues. We haven't prioritized issues. We sure as hell haven't costed them out. I don't know how, again, back to this whole thing, I don't know how you get to a final development agreement that includes the infrastructure you need to do mitigation, or to do, frankly, a whole number of other community benefits that aren't included outside of my issues. If you don't have a list and you don't have dollar figures next to them, and you haven't costed it out. So yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if we were at that place, and I would be livid about that. I can't even be upset about that yet. I'm only upset right now about the fact that no one's talking to us. So everyone's saying, "Oh yeah, we're not going to do anything that impacts your business. We're going to make sure that we're doing everything right by the port. We put together, I know you've seen it, a letter that's 16 pages long that all the truckers put together, the terminals put together, the railroads put together. We worked through a whole bunch of different issues with the port just so they understood where we were coming from. And then there's no follow-up. I mean, there's nothing there. So that's going to be our principal complaint at the council whenever they try to take any type of action, that it's not really reflective of what they need to do to have a full picture. And so I think that's where we just keep coming back to having your, path and my path cross, which is, how do we do this right? And obviously I'm coming at it from a point of, I just don't like the project, but if the project's going to go forward over my objections, I want it to work.
Yeah.
And I want it to have the least amount of impacts as possible. And if other people are coming out from the other land use, position that they want to see a change in the waterfront, they think it's great for the city, fine. But they all say the same thing. They actually want to front load the project so they can get all the mitigation out of it that they can. And they get community benefits and they do seaport compatibility. Where is it? Why is it so hard?
That's the thing. It's not. But I go back to the consultants. I go back to the Century Urban Report, which for those of you who are just joining us and may not be familiar with it, I'll just explain in a nutshell. The Century Urban Report mentions only the current redevelopment zone of downtown. It completely ignores the one over Howard terminal that is designated by SB 293 Skinner, and yet it refers to in its report the need for and the allowance of a 45-year bonding period, but then in the same damn paragraph, and yes, I'm aware it occurs twice, but this is something that makes you curse because it's frustrating, okay? The same damn paragraph, it reads first, hey, we started this calculation at 2020, basically just for grins, okay? And the calculation stops at 2039. That's 19 years. That's not 45 years. And yet, okay? And I'm thinking, do they actually believe that there are people out there that are that stupid that they would read this, not compare it with actually the law that was SB 236 Skinner, signed by the governor, and is out in the wild? I mean, they actually think that no one's going to pay attention, or there's going to be at least some guy with a YouTube channel and a blog that's going to go running his mouth about it again and again and again, right?
It just raises the question.
I mean, it's nuts.
It just raises the question. And it goes back to, the summer where they were saying we're going to do a tax increment, but not use 293. The A's saying that they wanted this to be their, property tax rebate or subvention, and they never mentioned bonding. Now the report mentions bonding. They're not clear about what the authority is. Are they doing it under, 293 or not? And those are all questions that would have been answered if they did a community financing district up front.
Yeah, they would have been answered. They knew what they were doing. I mean, look, I'm just calling it, okay? They don't know what they're doing, and they have too much pride to admit it.
Yeah, to your point, Zennie, I mean, they could have stood up the district without having a clear plan for how they were going to use it, or actually authorizing it. By it, I mean the tax increment. Having any of those plans in place, SB 293 allows them to stand up the mechanisms for actually doing their due diligence without ever pulling the trigger.
Yep.
And that's what you should, you expect them to do that.
But you're talking to the guy that did the data collection and model building for the Coliseum redevelopment survey area from 1986 to 1988, when it was approved by council and became the Coliseum redevelopment area. So I'm used to doing that, and I do it in my sleep. And my point is, these folks haven't taken the rudimentary steps, and I mean in italics, rudimentary, okay, steps to estimate dollar amounts available. And then they tried to basically, big time, like, oh yeah, we're the project manager, we're the mayor, we're the title, so we got this. And then when it was revealed they didn't, just simply pile crap on crap. And then, as the mayor said, well, this is new for us. So you're admitting you're wrong. Well, why not get it right?
Well, or at least they're, admitting that it's novel when it doesn't need to be. I mean, look, I'm the guest, you're the host, but let me turn this back to you with a question. When you hear from the folks in Las Vegas that they're not going to, be entertaining a TOT or hotel room tax or any of that stuff for this, but in the next breath they say, well, we'd be happy to do tax increment financing for you.
Yeah.
That's not an idle promise from them. That's called economic development. They know
what they're doing. And the ACE project there is, from what I've been able to see, such that it has a bunch of the same players that are involved in the Raiders project. And my point is that it may not look exactly like the Raiders district because they don't. The reason why they're not going to use the hotel tax is because, first of all, even though the elasticity of demand favors Las Vegas such that they can do it, the too many hoteliers that are nervous Nellies about having any other tax that forces it up, unless, of course, it's their imposed resort fee, which points to another weird issue. But
2018 elasticity for Vegas is not 2021 elasticity.
No, not at all. Not a great statement. Couldn't have said it better myself, Mike. Not in the least. But my concern, however, is, and this is, I'm upset for you all because I would be screaming. I know you don't want the project, but as I look at it, Mike, I think that you're leaving billions on the table by not making them do it right. In other words, by saying, okay, maybe, you know what I'm saying? Okay, maybe. Okay, that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, okay, maybe you want the project, but how about if you can't have the project? How about give billions, right? Because it's there. But this is what they're doing. They're basically saying, "Well, we don't see it, right?" And I'm saying, no, it's right here. Oh, we don't want to see it. Come on.
The fun thing is, the people who should be doing that are the council and the mayor and the professional staff of the city, right? If you're going to buy in on tax increment, then you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar. And why wouldn't you be maximizing that value? Why wouldn't you want to have all the benefits up front and properly bonded so you can build the infrastructure you want, provide the community benefits you want? And by the way, you know what you can't do when you're the developer and you've already had an underwriting issue? You can't get out of it. So, I mean, I think that's one of those things that people are looking at and just saying, well, the A's say they're going to be on the hook. Yeah, but that also means that they don't have to actually go through with secondary components of the development that they don't want to.
Say that one more time because it didn't come through on mine. It might come through in the recording, but say that one more time.
You want to make sure that the developer actually goes through with the portions of their project that they're not that happy paying for.
Right.
So after the stadium's developed, if you don't have something like a performance bond or some other phasing, some other way to police the phasing, right? They're going to pick and choose where they're spending their money. You think the city's going to turn around and pull their entitlements?
No.
Right. You think they're not going to have permits? No. They have all the cards. They have everything they need. They're going to choose the timing as long as it's legal and within the scope and scale of their development agreement and their EIR. If you bond up front against the tax revenue, They don't have that luxury anymore.
Nope.
Why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to lock them in? You get the win-win of you get the benefits for the community or for seaport compatibility or whatever else we're asking for. And it's truly underwritten by the future revenue. I mean, yeah. I mean, look, philosophically, we're never going to agree with the project because we just don't think that you need to turn over prime industrial maritime waterfront land for this use. But that's either opposition that exists or doesn't exist based on the land use planning profiles that are agreed to and debated by the city and by BCDC and state lands. Once that moves forward, I am straight in your camp, Zennie. I don't want to lose that argument. But if I do, we're back to exactly where we were before. Everyone's promised as a contingency to us losing that argument that we're going to be made whole. And that requires real investment. You can't be messing around. Like, you got to sit down and say, here's what everyone's asked for. We asked for the moon, right? Do I expect we're going to get everything? No. But I expect we're going to get most of that if people actually want to abide by the issues that are in front of them. And that just comes back to, they picked the most expensive site they could pick. If they're going to make it work, they're going to have to raise a lot of money. They know.
Here's where, if I were you all, I would file suit against the city, because as a person who's longtime trained in economic development, what the city should be doing is what we call business retention. What your concern is comes under the heading of business retention, right? Okay, so given the conversations we've had and what you've been doing, it's pretty hard to disagree with the idea that the city essentially is not doing any business retention at all. Am I wrong?
Well, I mean, I think let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
That everyone's intention is, okay, I won't give the A's benefit of the doubt. Everyone on the city side, the benefit of the doubt, that they want to have this just be a huge win-win. To your question then, where's the due diligence? Right? If you assume that everything is going to be fine, then you've done no due diligence.
Nope.
And then we're just back to the development agreement. How do you assess whether or not the development agreement is a fair deal for the community or for businesses, for the A's, for the city, for taxpayers, for bonding purposes, for the underwriters? How do you sell this to them? You know, how do you price out your bond? And then back to the other question.
Especially when you don't know where your boundaries are. On one hand, you have one consultant that says you're going to use the existing RDA boundaries. On the other hand, you have SB 293 Skinner, which basically implies a whole new set of boundaries and a new bonding period. And when the middle ground basically is to go to and say to the legislature, you know what, we need to basically carve out a piece here out of this existing redevelopment area that we had to basically continue for reasons of obligations, that 155-acre sliver is not going to harm us from meeting. That's what they needed to do. And yet what's been done, to me, should be bottled up and sold as a classroom in how not to do redevelopment.
I think that's right. I mean, if you take a step back even further, if you look at the bigger picture on issues like housing, which were always tied up with redevelopment before, redevelopment was an amazing tool for devoting a specific percentage of the tax increment back into affordable housing projects. And that leverage was real, right? Even with that coming off the top, people were still doing redevelopment deals. Why? Because it's the same thing, in for a dime, in for a dollar. Once you've agreed that that's the premise for why this works, there's no reason to quibble with the fact that there might be money coming off the top for something that you're reinvesting back in your community.
Right.
Absolutely. And so if you're going down that path with this project and you're not putting together that package, you end up with the situation we have now. People are fighting about the affordable housing component. Why? Build it into the spreadsheet that you're talking about, right? I mean,
I did a long time ago.
It's overhead.
Yep.
And they all know it's overhead. The percentage should not matter to the A's. It should matter to the city because they have a policy, but it shouldn't matter to the A's.
And
as long as their bottom line is that, you know, they've gone through the tax increment, it's paying for the cost of the mitigation. Why do they care what the percentage is?
Yeah. And Mike, what I find mind-boggling about how the city should enable, it's like enabling each other's ineptitude. Okay, and I'm just saying it just like that. Instead of saying to the A's, "Hey, look," which is what I said to Caval, I said, "You use the $85 million to reduce the cost of certain units of your housing to make them affordable." Right? That's the classic way we've done it. But that got flipped to, well, the A's have to pay for all their affordable housing, as Councilmember Fife put it. And I thought, are they crazy? That's not the idea. We've talked about that before. That's
right.
Not how that's not how you do it.
I mean, I think that's entirely fair if you believe, and I think this is a reasonable belief too. If you believe that the project itself is moving forward in a way where you don't expect the A's to follow through on any of their obligations offsite, right? If you just think that's a big shell game, then what you're going to ask for is a certain percentage of on-site affordable housing,
right,
as part of that project. And I think that's totally reasonable. So, I mean, back to your comments about what not to do. If you go back a couple of years from when the A's sponsored their first legislation on streamlining their CEQA process, guess who was in support of it? Affordable housing developers. Guess who the number one source of comments opposed to the EIR draft outside of our industry was? Housing advocates. The same people that were supportive of the project have totally flipped on it. They've completely changed on this.
Why do you think that is?
Because the A's have not followed through on telling people that they're going to actually make a real commitment to affordable housing. And so then it raises that question. Is it on-site, off-site? Well, that's a shell game. And why do you know it's a shell game? Because they haven't done what you've been talking about this whole time. They didn't budget for it and the outlays associated with the bonding that they should be doing from their tax increment.
Well, riddle me this, Mike. Why is it, let's hold that as according to Hoyle, okay? Let's add to that. Why would the city, as far back as 2019, knowing damn well, there's my third curse, that if you were to assume that time the ballpark was $500 million, that the tax increment throw off is going to be looked at somewhere in the middle of $800 million, something like that, which would cut your bond issue in half. But my point is, why didn't they release those numbers then? And why would they? Because Carl Chan did do this. And so did, I think it was Veronica Cummings from the city when they had that Chinatown town hall on November 20th of 2019. Why didn't they just tell the community then, hey, here's the subsidy, and here's how we're going to use the subsidy in different areas? They wasted all this time not producing a punch list of activities, everything from, new bus station here, new Head Start payments here. There's all of these community payments that can comprise a community benefits plan.
Right.
Oh, and then we carve out a piece for business retention and maritime, for the truck. I think we talked about a truck stop at one point, a new one, right? Yeah. I mean, these are the nuts and bolts of improving life around there,
right?
That haven't been done. And at this point, I am beyond pissed. Maybe I should go to court and sue him myself since nobody else. I don't, it's nuts that what's going on here. It really is. And I don't know, I'm trying to be alarmist, but what I'm saying do you find what I'm saying really alarming in terms of the techniques of it?
Yeah, I look, if if I was listening to this outside of any of the, other politics of it, or if I was an A's fan or I work for the city or whatever, and someone asked you just independently, completely objective, would you rather have the benefits of the project bonded up front versus on the back end when it might happen, outside of anything else, what you're spending it on, any of that? The answer would always be yes.
Yep.
If you're back to I think there's to your other question on the issue of the subsidy, I think there's a completely legitimate debate to be had about, is this a good use of public money? And you're either going to fall on one side of that argument or not with respect to tax increment, right? There's a whole group of folks that felt that redevelopment was not a good idea, even though it makes complete financial sense, right? And there was abuse in that system. The amount of, well, we've talked about this before, the fudging where you had blight, where you didn't have blight, and what they were doing with the affordable housing money, how they were hiding it, how they weren't using it. There were all kinds of problems with that system because there were ways to abuse it. But I helped write and sponsor a tax increment financing bond bill a couple of years ago in the legislature for ports. We think it's a legitimate economic development tool. But it is a subsidy, and you make a decision about it. We think the cost benefit for those things usually works out in everyone's favor, and that's why you're reading those protections under SB 293. That's why they're there, is to put risk back on the lap of the developer.
If I may,
the underwriting keeps them honest.
Yeah, and if I may, it gives us, and the reason why I defend public money use is it gives the public an ability to have a say in, for example, diversity of employment and other types of community uses that would be a benefit. But if you just say we're going to leave it to the private sector, we want the private sector to build it, the reason why I think that's foolish is, well, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a private activity, not for the public, but something that is so big it has a public impact. And
totally legitimate part of that debate. And obviously I'm in this project opposition, I'm politically aligned with folks that just believe that there should be no subsidies for this project at all. And I totally respect that position too. I mean, some of it's based on they don't want to give money to a billionaire. Okay, like that's fine. And I think that's a legitimate position to have too. But that's a debate that you have. And then once you've had that debate, then you're back to this question, which is the one we keep banging our heads against too. It's just like the land use question. Once the people who do the land use have decided what they want that zoning and planning to look like, you still need to have a project of it.
Right, absolutely.
Absolutely. That's being completely conflated. That's where I think the A's are not participating in good faith, and I don't know why the city isn't acting as the gatekeeper and holding their feet to the fire, right? If you're the developer, do you want to commit to more public amenities than you have to? No, it's the city's job to bring them along, right? That's why you have a development agreement. Mm-hmm. We're not Houston, right? We're California. We have basic Euclidean planning. The reason why we have zoning is because it's public health and safety, and we have standards that are built off of that. And so all those issues have to be addressed. People aren't asking for a direct tax subsidy under most redevelopment because their projects aren't big enough, right? So when we're looking at, and this is something where you're more of an expert in it than I am, but when you're looking at those very, very early iterations of how do you do tax increment financing for specific types of projects that are not blight-based, so outside of the scope of redevelopment, like transit-oriented development, those projects weren't big enough to throw off tax increment that were significant to a whole community, but they could be significant for the success or failure of a transit village. Right. Like, how do you replace the parking that you're replacing with this new project? You can't ask the developer to do it because it's way too big of a dollar figure. But over time, could you do something like, like the Fruitvale or MacArthur, where you take that money and you take it into a separate financing for a new parking structure? Of course you can, right? Can you finance all the other public amenities that become prohibitively expensive once you're densifying around a TOD area? You can totally do that, right? So those were the types of examples that I think when people were looking at, why you could wait from redevelopment, but you could still have viable tax increment financing. It was on the base of really simple examples like this. This is complicated. This is a huge project. And so you doubly want to make sure that you're getting all those benefits up front, that you are truly bonding against them for all the reasons we've been talking about. Here's the other thing. I don't want to ever be in a situation as a potential beneficiary of mitigation where it's part of a development agreement that can't be policed because that stadium's already out the bag, right? They're already moving forward.
Right.
What fee do I have later for coming back later and saying, hey, I thought I was going to get $200 million for this truck project grade separation. And they're like, sorry. What remedy do I have? They can't take away the stadium once it's built. They're not going to get rid of the subdivisions, right? That map is going to be approved. Those transfers are done. That title is theirs.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
I have to go to court and ask for cash. Give me a break. We know how that works.
Yeah.
I don't want cash. I want them to improve the project in a way which minimizes disruptions. And if they can't do that, then I'm sorry, they shouldn't do the damn project.
And that's not too much to ask. Are they leaving it to the port to work this out? Because sometimes I get the impression that the mayor is sloughing part of this off to the port, thinking, well, they have the answers in detail.
Yeah, that's what we were afraid of, 2.5 years ago when the port did their first ENA with their non-binding term sheet. And what we got back from the port when we said we're afraid of the business impacts, but we're also afraid that we're going to be asked to subsidize the project. Those were our two main concerns. And so in the non-binding term sheet between the port and the A's are two things. One, there's a provision that says the port will not subsidize the project, right? They have to make this work for them. This needs to be net revenue positive for the port for them to move forward with the deal. It's not just a giveaway of land. It's not a giveaway of revenue. And you sure as hell shouldn't turn around and ask the port, which is not backed by property tax revenue. It's a proprietary agency, which means its revenues are paid for by my members and our leases, to turn around and subsidize the A's. That's not what we're doing. And then secondarily, for the A's to actually put up the money and build the projects and do the mitigation necessary not to impact our business. Those were the two things we asked for. Those were the two things the port gave us. And the A's agreed to it. And that's the other thing about this, where this is about holding their feet to the fire. They wouldn't have had the agreement if they didn't agree to those things.
Right. Much for.
Yeah. And as a business, they are in the position of trying to minimize all their overhead of this project. You can't expect them not to do that. They have a fiduciary obligation to themselves to behave that way. That's why it's the obligation of the city to turn around and say, no. The only point of leverage here is not with the port, right? So if they turn around now and they did the development agreement, subdivision, and the entitlements, and the environmental review, and at the end of all that, as the lead agency, the city turned around and told the port, cut a different deal with these guys. Maybe you can get some more money out of them. There's no leverage left. I'm sorry, it's done. So if they want to slough it off and turn it around, not only would it be a complete violation of the agreement we already have between the port and the A's, which said we won't subsidize it, but it's asinine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you include those in the baseline project description for the EIR? Why wouldn't you include them in the development agreement scope? Why wouldn't you want them in your financing plan so you could actually underwrite against those project costs?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I get it. So I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of sleight of hand with respect to, pointing at each other, who's on first. We raised a lot of questions about that very early on, about whether or not the city was the proper lead agency for this project and whether it should be the port. We do projects with the port at marine terminals all the time. You know who isn't our lead agency? The city.
Right. The city is not.
The development of a marine terminal. Do it for the port.
Yeah.
But now you have this game. Now you have the game. And the people who benefit from the game are the A's. It's not the city. It's not the port. It's not us as businesses. It's not the community. And it shouldn't be. If you let the A's do it on their own, they would never choose to spend more money.
No. Not at all. I'm going to come back and talk more about this. It would be fun to have another official. You want to see if I can snag Dave and bring him in and see where his temperature's at?
Oh man, go ahead. I mean, I actually think that Dave has been pretty honest and direct with you on your shows. I think he's a exceptionally smart and bright guy, and I think that he's trying to do his best. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm being soft on the A's with this, but if I were them and the city said, don't worry, I'm not going to actually tell you how I'm going to finance this. I'm just going to go find money from Washington and Sacramento. And then they did this conference because I got a $14 million.
I got $14 million. Sorry.
I wouldn't be happy either.
Oh.
I mean, how can you blame them?
$14 million for a multi-billion-dollar project. Just
I would not. I don't blame them for being in the position that they're in. With respect to that, that is just the weirdest thing ever. I don't know why the city would step out and say we want to be responsible for specific project mitigation. I don't know why they would walk away from the existing leverage that they have with the IFD, even on site. I don't even know, frankly, because 293 is such a good deal. By the way, you know who wrote that? The A's in the city.
Yep. Oh yeah, I know. Who started them on it?
Yeah, I think you know that guy pretty well. They have unfettered ability to ignore the fact that there are on-site or off-site impacts under 293. That distinction does not exist.
Yeah.
So, I think we're just beating a dead horse now. I just have no idea why they're making this so hard. But it is on theme.
Yep.
I'll stop and end where we started. If they wanted this to be easy, we know where they would have built. It would have been at the Coliseum. They would have been playing in their new stadium by now.
That's true.
And, their business logic is their business logic, but they have picked the most complicated, most expensive place to try to build. And that's why this is expensive and complicated and taking a long time.
Let's pick this up as soon as we can with some twists and see if we can, at least in conversation, get some resolution here. Since, it doesn't appear that anything else is going on publicly. Mike, stick around in the background.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's what we're going to be waiting for, right? EIR, see what people actually want to do with the development agreement, see what they're proposing. I mean, rubber's going to hit the road pretty soon on this stuff.
Yeah. Hey, stick around in the background, folks. Subscribe to Zennie 62. Not only bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com, but hey, get your smartphone, play on your smartphone and have fun with it, because it's I developed it into and here's the fourth time I'm going to curse, a pretty cool ass app of a sort. So, Mike, stick around in the background. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.